Once the largest Methodist church in the Midwest, City Methodist Church in Gary, Indiana ceased worship in 1975 after serving the area faithfully for almost 50 years. Gary is an industrial city in Lake County, Indiana, about 25 miles from downtown Chicago. Through the 1960s, it was known nationally for its massive steel manufacturing capacity. In addition, Gary is known in pop music culture as the birthplace of Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5. As a prosperous steel city, Gary population peaked in 1960 at over 178,000 residents, but that was at the height of its steel manufacturing. Population soon began to decline due to overseas competition and reconstructing in the steel manufacturing industry. City population fell by a whopping 55% from 1960 to 1970s. In its current state, Gary is challenged with high unemployment rates and decaying infrastructure. Estimates are nearly one-third of all houses and businesses in the city are unoccupied or abandoned, with one of those once prominent buildings being the City Methodist Church. In 1916, Dr. William Grant Seaman became the pastor of the First Methodist Church in Gary, but he had bigger dreams. He was a man of dynamic energy and had the vision for a much larger church to serve the growing population. He promised to bring a more prominent religious presence to the community and traveled the area gathering the faithful and seeking support for his vision. His dream would eventually become the City Methodist Church. In pursuit of the new church, Seaman soon secured valuable support from U.S. Steel, at the time the largest employer of the city. The company agreed to donate the land on which City Methodist would be built as well as provide funding for half the cost for the structure. Ground was soon broken for church construction by Lowe and Ballenbacher builders in 1925. The structure took about 21 months to build at the whopping cost for its time of over $800,000. The building consisted of a sanctuary at the forefront as well as a much larger 9-story complex that included access to Seaman Hall, an auditorium area that could seat 1,000 people at its prime. The space also offered corporate offices, a gymnasium, dining hall, and a Sunday school. Among other things, the builders originally planned on including a bowling alley and a rooftop garden, additions that were never finished due to limited funding. Once construction was completed, Albert Gary, the city's namesake, donated the organ that the church would use for all its future services. The first service at City Methodist was officially held on October 3, 1926. By 1927, the church boasted a congregation of over 1,700 and a full-time staff of 6. By 1929, William Seaman had grown unpopular with the parishioners, due at least in part to his interest in promoting cultural diversity, including interfaith pageants. The dissatisfied congregation soon arranged for him to be transferred against his will to a different church in Ohio. The loss of Seaman would be the first major signpost of the church's eventual downfall. After Seaman left the congregation, his successor was even less popular among the churchgoers. During the Great Depression, the church suffered extreme financial loss. To keep its doors open during this time, church leaders leased parts of Seaman Hall to Gary College. Thereafter, in the post-war era, Indiana University Center also used part of Seaman Hall. By 1949, Indiana North University occupied 3 of the floors in the North Office Complex. The church grew and became prosperous again. By 1950, they counted membership of over 3,000. The congregation held weekly services and offered night classes to families. The city of Gary began to decline in the early 1960s as the steel manufacturing industry moved its operations to other areas of the country and steel manufacturing grew in other countries. Thus began the decline of the church's fortunes. The institution at the time was predominantly white, stable economically, and middle class. As steel and manufacturing jobs moved out, the church lost large numbers of congregants due to white flight. During that time, crime rates in the area soared, causing more departures. Maintenance costs for the church were ruinous because of its huge dimensions and the harsh lakefront. Years passed, and by 1973, there were only 320 members in the aging congregation, about a third of whom were early congregants from the church's beginnings. By 1975, after multiple attempts to sell the church, church leaders decided to close its doors and end church services. During the closure process, some of the spaces were still being used by the college campus, but the church itself wasn't used. It was left to decay, and by the 1990s, its decline was fully evident. In 1997, a fire accelerated the building's deterioration. Since then, the building has been placed on the Indiana Landmarks for Most Endangered list. Most of its interior fixtures have been removed through decay and theft. The structure now is a popular location for urban exploration as well as an unauthorized site for goth weddings. In late 2011, a significant part of the church's roof collapsed. With its safety compromised, a special permit from the city now must be secured in order to visit. Even in decline, City Methodist has been featured in many Hollywood films, such as A Nightmare on Elm Street, Transformers: Dark of the Moon, and parts of Pearl Harbor and Sense8. The city of Gary has revived a plan from the early 2000s to turn the site into a large park, with the sanctuary being the centerpiece. The rest of the building is to be demolished. From Pastor Seaman's vision in the beginning, through church construction through its decline during the Depression, its reemergence to prosperity and its eventual decay, City Church has served as an important landmark of the city of Gary. The church has served its congregations and the community through times of hardship and prosperity. History lived here.